Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fascination Street with Jimmy and not Mika. Tonight is Jimmy and Sarah. So thank you very, very much for joining us. I know it's been a little while since I've been on camera. Work and many other things have all kind of got in the way, but we're back and we are so honored to have with us tonight Mr. Calvin Parker and our good friend, Mr. Philip Mantle.
Yes, all good. I am so sorry about the delay of us coming on. We had a bit of a corrupt file, but
we're now here. So Philip is joining us from Pontefract in the UK. Calvin is with us from the good old South Mississippi.
Pascagoula.
Pascagoula, which is, yeah. Oh, hang on.
Yeah, tell the chat room there is another Fascination Street that has just gone live.
There we go. We're still mopping up the tech, but we're getting there. Everyone should be joining us in a minute. So all we'll do is we just kind of shoot the breeze for a little while, guys, until everyone's over. So, oh, hello, dog on there, dog on the foot. God, we've never had this tech trouble before, and it must admit it's quite exciting. Has it kept you guys on your toes as much as us?
Yeah, we've enjoyed it. We hadn't had a chance to speak all week, so some of us get to take a vacation.
Yeah, I know.
So, you know, we hadn't been talking that much, but, you know, we've enjoyed our little chat.
Absolutely. How the other half live while us are grinding, right, Calvin?
Well, yeah, if I don't talk to Calvin at least once a week, he thinks I've done a runner somewhere. You know, he thinks I'm off on my jollies somewhere.
Yeah.
But,
I'm like that with Sarah.
You guys again.
Yeah. We've been on each other about once a week, but we do... Used to, we'd speak 2 or 3 times a week. Now we're down to once, and now I had to just run him down to talk to him.
You have to pin him down on another person's show.
Yeah, got to catch him.
Started out as a bright and beautiful relationship, and now he hardly talks to me.
Yeah.
One of the things that people won't know about Calvin, of course, is he in his time, he was also a bounty hunter. That's true.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah,
I enjoyed breaking fingers and all.
I cannot escape no matter what.
Wow, Calvin.
Yeah.
I've had quite a few different jobs just trying to see what I liked. And I found out one thing. I don't like nothing where you have to work. So I'm back to fishing.
Why do you think we're trying to make YouTubing work for us? Grinding, right? But oh wow, no, that was interesting. How did you get into the bounty hunting thing?
Well, it kind of all started. Somebody owed somebody some money, and they hired me to go collect the money, and I did such a good job collecting it. And this was a bounty hunting service that I collected it for. He didn't approve of the ways that I collected it, but I did collect it. And he just gave me a job after that. So I got all the little bad jobs that nobody else wanted to do.
And that's really weird because obviously we know you and you're like the softest person ever. You're just...
Oh, I generally love people, but,
yeah,
you know, I guess it's different when you work for somebody and they expect you to break some elbows and legs and stuff, you know, for
ask no questions, I'll tell you no lies.
Not saying you ever did anything like that on a family show ever.
No.
But yeah, but I mean, it's like when we was going through like some of the old footage of you, like back in the 70s. I mean, dude, you look ripped. I mean, what was it? Was that a 6-pack or an 8-pack? That was pretty.
I was in pretty good shape. I mean, I was much of a man back in the day. Now I'm much of nothing. So, but I enjoy life. That's the main thing. I love my family. I love God. I love life. I love my friends. And although up until Philip come into my life, I didn't have too many because I didn't associate with people.
I thought I was going to say I was happy up until Philip come into my life. Everything was okay.
It was quieter.
What was that, Mrs. Mantle?
Right. And I fished before the book. I was fishing 5 days a week and just taking a couple of days off to go cut people's yards that weren't able to do their own yards and go work for little charities here and there. And then when he came into my life, I don't guess I've been fishing. He's just ruined my fishing. Now that it's got where I got a little bit of time again, the water's bad. So he put a hex on me.
Yeah, he's got a habit of doing that. What do you
Yeah.
what do you normally catch in the Mississippi? Because bass is quite good in the Mississippi, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, where I live, you can fish fresh or saltwater.
Hmm.
And the saltwater fish, well, at the just for instance, at the fishing rodeo that I was a wade master at last time, they were catching redfish, lemon fish, which they call them something else, speckled trout, flounder, all that. Now the freshwater fish, I was catching bass, catfish, crappie, walleye, and it's just a number of different fish.
Mm-hmm.
But I know one thing: you don't want to judge a fishing rodeo or be the wade master. That's just some way to get you to work, put an honorary position on you to make you work.
You really are allergic to it, aren't you?
And checking
Oh,
all
gosh,
those fish
yeah.
to make sure there's no pebbles in them as well, because
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
something
yeah.
that I used to experience when I used to do some fishing. Little tip that people didn't know: I was a fisherwoman.
She was a
Oh,
fisher girl
great.
back
I
in,
was.
back
I
in the day.
was. So
But
yeah, putting the old pebbles in the fish's mouth and stuffing them down their throats, that's
Yeah.
one way to get the fish a little bit heavier.
We really are tight on cheaters when they fish down here. I mean, that's a killing offense there almost. But you know what I found in some of these fish, and it makes me sick. I have a good friend that does all these river cleanups and all, and he
Mhm.
calls it fishing for trash. Now, when I was a wade master last time, we would open up some of the snapper and these plastic caps off these bottles. They would swallow some, and that blocks her, and
Wow.
that'll starve them to death. And
That's
I found that, and it makes me sick, seeing the water trashed out like that.
yeah. It's becoming a more and more kind of common thing now. The amount of plastics, etc. I mean, we were
Oh, it
talking.
is.
We went on air about the event Horizon as well, and how that's kind of wiped out sort of like a generation of like ecology within like your surrounding area as well.
Right. Yeah,
People,
that affected everybody. Everything affects your fishing. You have to be careful, but pollution is the one thing that really gets me. People pollute. And
yeah,
another thing, when people mistreat their pets. You
yep,
wouldn't believe all the pets that I picked up on the side of the road. I actually was working one day, and I looked, and there was this little air conditioning unit, just a cover on it. And these ladies had a pig, and it was growing, and it was living in there. So I went up, I told them, I said, would you please sell me this hog, because, you're mistreating it.
mhm.
So to be honest with you, they did. I brought it home to my wife, and it hated women, and it chased her. And I called it. I kept that hog for something like 2 years before it finally jumped on her, and she had to get rid of it. But I would go to work, and I couldn't keep her in a pen. I didn't want to. And when I come home, I'd bring her donuts.
You're shedding it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And she would try to follow me. I called her on the phone one day. I said, Miss Piggy's kind of following me. Would you come out and get her and take her back in the house? Needless to say, that was one of them days it was 22 degrees. Well, I left, and the pig got between her and the house and tried to bite her and wouldn't let her back in. Ooh, you talk about mad. Then after that, we had to kind of get rid of her.
What, the pig or the wife?
Yeah, I would rather get rid of the wife at that time. I loved the little pig. I mean, I had a lot of money invested in her.
Oh, Calvin.
And the pig didn't gripe. She did. She was the one griping.
Oh my! I did not think tonight's show was going to go down like this, folks. I really did not. I'm so glad it has. I really am. Oh, Calvin, that is brilliant.
But we've had our experiences. I mean, me and my wife been together a long time. I want grandchildren, but I'll never get that because my daughter, her and her husband want to do work. He's a dentist and she's a dental hygienist, and they have two things on their mind, actually. They like to work and make enough money that they can take about 10 vacations a year and spend all their money so they have to work next year to do it again. Wow. But that's their business. I mean, that's what they want to do. But he's a good dentist and she's good. And I got some of the greatest family in the world.
Well, listen, Calvin, when you're over here in August, I've got 4 grandchildren. You know, if you want to take a couple back with you for a while,
I'd be glad. I'll bring them all back.
You've not
there we go. The tight Northerner wanting to pay out at Christmas for his grandkids. That's a new level, that is, Phil.
My sisters all got kids, and they offered to bring them over and all. And I always say I'm busy or I'll be gone. It's a thing now that, you know, after you live by yourself so long, or you and your wife do, it's just hard to want somebody else around that much.
Absolutely. I mean, you have your kids and you love them dearly, but you cannot wait till they turn 18.
Oh, you can't wait.
You get your lounge back yourself. It's not full of Lego or Xboxes or toys.
What is that about? The Xbox is yours.
Lego and toys.
Yeah.
I am here, by the way, guys.
He's the one that builds the Lego.
Yeah, anyway, Mika is with us.
Hey,
Mika is the chat master this evening.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, dear.
Calvin's just asked how you are, sweetheart.
I'm good, you?
What'd you say, boo?
It's a bit louder than that.
I'm good, you?
Not quite that loud.
You're 50? Well, you're a young-looking 50.
Right, cool. Right.
He's in the prime of his life. I remember when I was 15, I was having to work for a living. I mean, I bought me a log truck and had a chainsaw. And actually, when I was in school, I had a history teacher, and I didn't know he was going to become family and all this. And he used to tear me up with a board. I mean, that's back when corporal punishment was heavy. Now, I can't say I didn't enjoy it. I mean, that I didn't deserve it. So I quit school because I was tired of getting my butt spanked. Well, come to find out, I married his niece. So all the family reunions on. And there for a long time, I didn't dislike him, but I didn't really like him. I didn't want to be around him. But then her mother died the other day, and we was at the funeral, and he come up, and we was talking and all, and I really enjoyed being around him. I would, I mean, he's changed. He's actually human now instead of a teacher.
Well, do you know what? It's quite funny because, like, I mean, we've just had our wedding anniversary, and I try and keep sort of like the rest of the year quiet and make an effort to speak to Sarah on our wedding anniversary. And I found out this year she's not actually a bad person, so I've made more of an effort to speak to her since June.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's quite human underneath everything else.
Yeah, they are. But do you know what a lot of my problem was? Is that I wouldn't open up and talk to my family and talk to my wife. When this happened, I just shut everybody out of my life except for just straight out what you had to say and what you had to talk about. I was pretty much a loner in my own life.
Yeah.
So up until July last year, when the book come out, that was the first me and her had really sat down and talked about everything, about what had happened. And it felt good to get all this off my shoulders. I hadn't talked to none of my family. I hadn't spoke to none of my friends or my wife. And that's the one I should have been leaning on all the time. And if it hadn't been for her and Philip, this book never would have got done because I could care less if I wrote it. And it still, you know, takes away from my fishing, but that's okay. I'm dealing with that. I've had a lot of fun this year. And we've actually been on, I can't say vacations. You know, we'd go to these conferences, but we would go together and we would share that experience together. And it's actually brought my wife and I a lot closer together doing this. So I have to say this has been a good experience for me.
So what made you come around to the idea of putting the book together in the first place then, Calvin?
Philip and my wife, actually, we went to a funeral of a neighbor, and while we was at the funeral there, at the wake, I signed a register, a log, you know, for the guests to sign. And I don't normally sign my name to nothing, but I accidentally signed my real name to that, and people recognized it. That was from Texas, and they started talking. And I said, "Oh man, and this isn't the place. This man's wife and daughter's grieving. I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about this stuff." I told my wife, I said, "Let's go." So we got in the truck and left. And on the way home, she said, "You need to write a book." I said, "No, I don't believe so. I don't have an education. Don't know anything about literature. I could care less if I had a book." "Oh, please do." I said, "Well, I tell you what, if I got a ghostwriter, I'll write a book." I was just putting her off what I was doing. I knew I'd never get a ghostwriter to do something like that for me. So we got home the next day. Philip happened to call on an unrelated subject, such as on that book Charlie had written, Close. I don't even know the name of it.
Is that UFO Contact at Pascagoula?
Yeah.
That's it. So Philip had called to ask a couple of questions about that. Well, honestly to say, I couldn't answer nothing he had to ask. And because I hadn't read the book, didn't never plan on reading it, didn't even have one. Although Charlie and I signed a contract when I was about 21 years old, somewhere in there. He come in, he said, "I'm going to write a book. A certain percentage of this is yours. And this is just the way that it is. I need to get you to sign this contract." Well, I didn't care. I just signed the contract. And that was the end of that. I'd never even seen a copy of the book. And then when Philip called, we was talking about that a little bit and all, and he asked me what the biggest thing was. And I told him it was the press, and they changed everything. They tried to make something that was already greater or more scarier or something. I don't know what they was trying to do. I don't know how you can get
Try and sensationalize the whole
right.
thing.
I don't know how you could, but they did. He said, "Well, look, this is your legacy. You write this book, you write a book, put it in black and white, and they can't change your story." Well, that really made good sense to me, but I still wasn't going to do a book at the time. So I lied to Philip and I said, "Let me think about it for about a week or so." He says, "Well, I'll call you back," knowing I was going to screen calls. So he called back and I wouldn't answer one time, but I accidentally answered one day. And he started talking, "Have you thought about the book?" I said, "You know, Philip, I'm not a smart man. I don't have a big education and all." He said, "Well, I'll help you with this thing. I'll keep you on the right track, and we'll take it from chapter to chapter." I said, "Well, I'll do it, but the one thing I don't want is for you to edit anything in the book. I don't want my spelling edited. I don't want any words I say. I know it's a bunch of redneck language in there. Don't edit that out. If it's a period or question mark in the wrong place, don't edit that." He agreed, and he's been good to his word. Now, there for a little while, he caught a little bit of flack over it, but he did the book just exactly the way that we had talked about and planned it. And it's been great. We've got a big response. I had just one guy that I can think of last week that got real critical. And he called me and he started, "I don't believe you and I don't believe this." And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Have you bought the book and read it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, look, man, I don't care if you believe me or not. You bought the book, so go ahead."
Yeah.
So that shut him up.
Well, that's accurate, is that, Jimmy and Sarah? I mean, I got the rights. I run, as you know, I run my one-man publishing firm, Flying Disc Press, and I got the rights to Charlie's book, UFO Contact at Pascagoula, to republish it.
Oh.
And I just thought, I know Charlie's dead, but I believe Calvin is still alive. It'd be nice to, you know, see if I could get a little interview with him just to stick in the back of it. Took me 3 months to find him, you know, took me 3 months. And when I finally did track him down, that's how, you know, that's just how it worked. And, you know, we'd no idea what to expect from the book. And you see, you know, I'd never spoke. I was honored to speak to Calvin. You know, I was just quite happy speaking to him. And it went from there. And of course, the book is both visual and audio. I mean, there's a lot of pictures and newspaper cuttings. One of the things that Calvin didn't have is photographs, documents, that kind of thing, because you know, he's been in various places where it's being washed away, you know, when the hurricane hits. So we have literally had to start from scratch to find things like that, like documents and newspaper cuttings. So we set about that, and you know, we sort of put the plan together for the book, and Calvin wrote it, and I would email it back to him and say, can you just expand a bit on that? Can you explain what that is? And whatever it is we've done along the line. I mean, we have a contract, but I always said at the end of the day, the final decision on whatever we do lies with Calvin. You know, this is his story. It's not mine. I'm just helping him tell the story. And that's not just with the book. It's with television appearances or conferences, anything. Calvin has the final say. And I think, you know, that and the fact that his wife, Waynette, got him in a headlock and said, remember the pig? Well, you know.
Yeah. And so, it's also nice as well to have Calvin's side, because I mean, like, there is so much from sort of like Charlie's side that you can find out there, whether it be book. I believe, was it in 1974 he also released was it a vinyl as well, telling his story in audio?
Yeah, he did. There's a vinyl telling his story. So in that respect, Charlie had already told his side of the story.
Exactly.
So my way of explaining it to Calvin was, well, this is your chance to tell your side of the story, which has never been fully told before. It had been told in segments, but never the whole lot. Yeah, and thankfully he agreed, and we took it from there. And the book went on to be a bestseller on Amazon, which astounded, you know, all of us. Yeah. We were happy, but and on it goes. You know, Calvin and I have been amazed with the things that have happened since the book came out, and we're always wondering what's going to happen next. We you know, something will drop in our inbox tomorrow, Jimmy, which will surprise the pants off us that we never expected. What that could be, we don't know.
Well, I mean, look at what's just happened to you recently, Calvin, getting your marker.
Yeah. Now that was
Would you like to tell our guys a little bit about that?
That was quite an honor to get that marker. And it's, I don't know, I ain't got no pictures right here with me, but
we have.
Do you? Great.
Yeah.
Just going to try to.
Yeah, but yeah, tell us about how that all came about then, Calvin.
Well, Philip and I had the book out, and in the process, this lady that is over the tourism and everything in the historical division of Pascagoula wanted to have a book signing, Rebecca Davis. So we went to the book signing, and actually I agreed to go set October the 11th, the day of the anniversary, and sign a few books. Was I shocked? These people showed up from everywhere. We actually ran out of books that she had ordered, and the people wanting to hear the stories, so I stood up and done a short segment, the first time I'd really ever spoke in front of a crowd. But it was so much fun, and the enthusiasm of the people and all. Well, it's inspired Rebecca. It inspired the people of the Pascagoula. So they started talking about putting a marker up and starting to have conferences and like a museum and have book signings, and every year they have events. Recently, you know, they had the rodeo and the publication of the marker. The mayor came out and said how much he appreciated us, and he wished that Philip could have been there with us, and it was just really nice. And they got it, and they have a lot more plans uh, for the future, and they want to turn Pascagoula into a tourist town, and I'm all for that. I'll help them any way that I can with it. So that's what I do with my free time when I hear it. If they put on an event, I'll go sign books. Of course, Rebecca orders the books from us, and she gets a big discount. So she puts her little piece on them to make money for the city, for the tourism thing. And that's how they pay for all this. So I go and sit and sign books until your arm's about to fall off. But I enjoyed it. This has been some great people down here.
Yeah, well, the historical marker that Calvin's referring to, of course, there's no taxpayers' money has gone into paying for this. It's all been raised by the charity, which is called Main Street Pascagoula, run by Rebecca Davis. I mean, she's been an absolute dream to work with. And the marker itself is near to the location where Calvin's close encounter happened. And it's, you know, it's concreted in, it's a large information board. Can't go into too much detail because of the size of it, but it's still significant. And there's a piece of artwork on it. And Calvin and I did not propose the marker. It's not our idea. It came from someone within the Historical Society of Pascagoula. We helped with some of the wording on it. You know, have you thought about this? You thought about that? And the artwork that's on it, you know, I supplied. And that comes from a colleague of mine in Poland. He's one of the artists who does some of our book covers. And that particular piece of artwork is going to be on the Spanish language edition of Calvin's book. So I just sort of, you know, submitted it as just as an idea. Maybe you'd like to use this, and they liked that, and hey presto. And so it is an official historic marker, you know, close to the site. You can't put it bang on the site because you'd be in the water, because the old pier, you know. And like I say, you know, it was a great honor for both of us, especially for Calvin, you know, seeing him there with the mayor and other dignitaries and some of Charlie's family.
That was great.
Which is just fantastic. So from our initial conversation, you know, and Calvin not really wanting to do anything, you know, we've gone on to have a best-selling book. Calvin's, you know, found new friends, and you know, in addition to his life, and you know, at the end of it, we've got a historical marker that's there for many years to come. I mean, you know, that's almost unheard of, Jimmy. You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's confirmation for you as well, Calvin, that you know, and like for you, I mean, there we go. We've just brought the picture up now of you stood with the marker, Calvin. You know, I mean, your life, like when it first happened and that, I mean, anyone that's followed the story, watched any of the documentaries know how radically significant your life changed then. And then you had all those years of like quietness, people doubting your experience and other bits and pieces like that, to then now finding this whole new lease of like, and that the fact that the experience that you had at the time, no matter how bad or traumatic it may have seemed, is now doing so much good. Would that be a fair assumption?
I would say it's doing good. It has brought our community together. I'm talking about the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We are just drawn together because we have something of a common interest now. And the historical marker, the state of Mississippi's taking it over, and they'll do the maintenance and all on it. So it'll be there forever and a day. Exactly. But this has been good for me. It's been good for my marriage. I mean, if you got a problem and you don't talk to your wife about it, then you got a problem, because she's going to nag all the time and want you to tell me about it. Tell me about it. So, and I'm not bad about opening my mouth and telling her a whole lot. But, you know, it's brought us together, and now we can sit down and openly talk. And the important thing to her is I let her be a part of it. She has decisions to make, and all this, and we do all this together. The money we take, and you know, it hadn't been a whole lot, but we do stuff with it together. We donate some to charity, mostly my charity since a house flooded. But we it's helped our relationship. I got to say that. We had the news out there when they had the marker. He said, "Do you have anything to say?" Well, I like to tear it up. Everybody was at. That was the first time my whole family had been there for me. My father, my mothers, my sisters, and all them. But all of them got together and surprised me and came over. And then to top that off, Charlie's family came in. And at one time during this whole process, we had even quit speaking to each other. So they come in and wanted to hug my neck, because if it hadn't been for mine and Philip's work on this book and all, and Rebecca Davis, then this marker wouldn't have been there. And it's an honorary thing for Charlie also.
Exactly.
So I felt good having his oldest son especially, and his youngest daughter, and his sister was there. And it was really nice to have them there to represent Charlie. And I made sure that his son got up in front of the cameras and talked, was able to talk to the mayor and all, and he wanted to tell Charlie's part of the story, which, he did, and that was great. I think a lot of Eddie, we used to fish together a lot. Now, everybody actually thought Charlie and I was friends, but Charlie was so much older, he never was really my friend. He was my father's friend. And they'd take all of us kids and all fishing with them when they went. We'd go out on the Pearl River and fish, and then down here. But, there's some things that I would like to tell Charlie now, if he was still alive, like, Charlie, I'm sorry I got mad at you, because I thought you was the one that broke the story, and I recently found out you didn't do it. And, I would apologize to him for that. And I got mad at him for staying. We were supposed to drop it. Charlie and I agreed to drop this after that night. We weren't going to tell anybody. But he made that first phone call, and we told everybody. So, I would like my chance to apologize to him. But, he's gone, so there's no apologies to be made. Now, his daughter.
What you do, though, Calvin, rectifies that.
I try.
Well, I mean, the book itself is dedicated to Charlie,
Yeah.
And Calvin calls him a true hero, because he was also a military veteran who saw combat in the Korean War.
In the Korean War.
And I'm in combat, and even though the book is Calvin's side of the story, we still tell Charlie's story in brief, because you cannot separate the two. They were both there together, so he's not left out in that respect. And of course, with the historical marker, it's to both men. It was, Calvin wasn't put in front of Charlie or anything like that. We had no say in that. So it's equally dedicated to both men. And what happened to them on that night, on the Pascagoula River, October the 11th, 1970 something.
Got a small picture of Charlie up at the moment.
Well, yeah. So might be the appropriate time for Calvin to tell us, what happened that night.
Yeah. So would you mind talking us through how the whole thing came about, Calvin? Where
absolutely, I won't mind at all.
What were you doing?
Of course, I had just moved to the Gulf Coast the day before. And I didn't have anywhere to live. I mean, I had the money to get a place. Charlie says, well, try this job. I'll rent you an apartment for $50 a week. And you just stay with me. Well, it was just him and his wife and his daughter there. So I agreed to do that. So we got up the next morning and went to work at the F.B. Walker and Son shipyard. So we put in a long day at work. I mean, it was hot for an October day. It was still hot down here on the coast. He said, look, let's go fishing when we get off. Let it cool down, then we'll go home and eat and take a shower and go to bed or something. I said, well, that sounds like a good idea. Of course, any excuse to fish is a good excuse as far as I'm concerned. So we got off work and we went to his house. And I didn't have no fishing equipment. We picked up his fishing equipment. He said, well, I know a place to fish. It's at the old grain elevator. And let's go there and try it. And we'll sit around and try to fish a little while. So we actually went to one place before this, but we ended up at the old Shaw Peters shipyard. And it was an abandoned shipyard at the time. And when we got there, I noticed there's no trespassing signs. Well, I didn't feel real good about that to start with because I wouldn't break the law back in for nothing. So I said, Charlie, you know, I see some no trespassing signs. Maybe we don't, oh, I'll fish here all the time. Don't worry about it. So I broke the law with Charlie and we went on down and sat on a pier. We pulled us up an old log that was laying out there and we started fishing. Well, I was looking across the river when I noticed these blue lights coming in from behind us. And I actually thought it was a law that had pulled up behind us and gonna run us off for being down on this shipyard property. And as I stood up and turned around and looked, a big bright light got a lot brighter. And Charlie had noticed about the same time I did, and he stood up and turned around. And that's when three robotic-looking creatures started floating toward us. And they was coming toward us, but they was coming so fast, I didn't know how they was making it through all the debris and junk over there. But we noticed they was floating before it was all said and done. Well, they got to us, and two of them got a hold of Charlie, and one got a hold of myself. And that's pretty much the last time I seen Charlie till we came out. But I felt an injection of some kind, or heard a little bit of air. I didn't know at the time what it was, but later on, you know, we figured out it was some kind of injection. And it had to be to settle your nerves, because before then I was really kind of worried about everything and would have run if it had been somewhere to run. And this thing picked us up and levitated us about 2 foot off the ground, and we was going toward that big bright light, which later on we found out it was some kind of craft. They got us to the door, and my thing was, instead of worried about what was going on, is where's these darn lights coming from? How come they're so bright? And I looked inside, and it looked like the lights was coming out of the paint, out of the walls. So I couldn't move my body, but I could turn my head a little bit and roll my eyes a little. This thing made a left turn, took me down the hall a little ways. Then it made another right turn and took me in and put me on an examination table, what I'm going to call it, at about a 45-degree angle. And I was laying there kind of at a little angle with my head up, and I couldn't move still, but something dropped out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards, and it stopped about a foot and a half from my head. Now that was amazing too, because I'd never talked to Charlie about his experience. He said looked like a big eye had went and looked over his body, but this didn't look like an eye. He might have been talking to a camera eye or something. But it stopped above my head, and I could hear it click. It clicked 4 times, and then it shot back up into the ceiling. Well, by this time, the big robotic-looking creature with a crab-like hands, now his legs never ever separated when he brought us. He just glided wherever he went. But he stepped back to a corner, and through the corner of my eye, I could see I'm calling it a female. I don't know if it's a female or not. Really don't know what it was. But it was more of a feminine creature come over. And the amazing thing, the other one had crab-like hands, but she had regular hands, except her 2 middle fingers was a little longer. and she grabbed me by the cheek, and she kind of peached on my cheek there a little bit. I couldn't feel no warmth from her skin. Well, I couldn't feel nothing from her skin, but she just done that. And then she got her other hand, pushed my jaw down, and she run them two middle fingers down my throat and try to come up behind that little hang me down thing in the back of your throat. I don't know what it's called, but it hangs down and gets in your way, and you have a sore throat, it swells up. Well, she tried to come in under that, and I started choking and couldn't breathe, and I panicked. Well, she took her fingers out, and by that time I was bleeding some and I couldn't breathe, and she communicated. Now, I never seen her mouth move, but I could hear her voice just as well as I'm sitting in the room talking to y'all. She said, "We're not going to hurt you," or "I'm not going to hurt you," or "Don't be afraid." I forget just exactly how she worded it. But anyhow, she said not to have no fear. She's not going to hurt me. And she kind of backed up because I was choking and all. She backed up a little bit, and that old big ugly thing that brought me in there come back over and grabbed me by the arm, and he gave me another injection, and it calmed me down. Well, after that, she was backed up out of the way. He levitated me back off the table, took me out the door, took me back to the river, facing the river, and put me down almost the same spot they picked me up. Except my arms was outstretched toward the river and all. And I could hear Charlie, "You okay, son? You okay, son?" And that's when I kind of snapped out of it. And when he did that, we turned around and looked, or both of us were standing there looking. And they made it back to the craft, I guess, because that bright light that came out went off. And this thing picked up off the ground just a little bit. It was already hovering off the ground a little bit, but it really wasn't making any noise. Then it made a big zip noise then, and it just disappeared into the air. And Charlie and I sat down. He said, "Let's sit down and talk a minute. You know, all this is already over." Well, my first instincts were it might be over, but if I was able to run, my legs wouldn't shake, and I wouldn't sit down here with you. I'd be gone. So we sat down, and we talked just a second, not about what happened to us, but about agreeing not to tell nobody what had happened. And that's like I told Charlie, let's just go home, go to bed, get up tomorrow morning, go back to work. Well, it sounded good to Charlie. He agreed until we got to the car. We made our way back to the car. We had a little trouble cranking the car and getting it to go. And I noticed the left passenger window over where he was sitting was shattered in place. So when he opened the door, the window just fell out. And had a lot of trouble. That was a brand new car at the time. Had a lot of trouble getting it cranked. We finally got her cranked. Turned this thing around, and I headed out. Well, he seen there was a little store down the road where that had a payphone on it. He said, "Stop here, stop here. I need to make a call." Well, I thought he was going to call his wife, but the first call he made was to Keesler Air Force Base. We fooled around, hunted a dime. We didn't even have change. And, you know, back then there weren't cell phones. So we found a dime under the car seat. And I had heard him talking a little bit, but then I heard him say, "Well, I'll call the damn sheriff department then." But Keesler had told him, Air Force Base, told Charlie to call the local authorities, which would be the Jackson County Sheriff Department. So he came back, and we scrambled around and tried to find another dime. And we finally found one. He made a call, and he called them, and I could hear him in the background say, "Okay, okay," just a little small talk. And my curiosity was getting me what was going on. He come back to the car. He said, "They said wait right here, not to move." I said, "Who in the world is they?" He said, "It's the sheriff department." So we sat there and waited, and it wasn't just a few minutes. I mean, it was fast. They showed up. two patrolmen got out. One come to my side and one went to Charlie's side. Wanted to see some ID. And he kind of looked in the car. He never asked to search the car, but he just kind of looked in, asked me if I'd step out. And I said, yes, sir. So he told me, he said, I want you to lean your head back, close your eyes, touch your nose with your finger, your middle finger. So I did that. Then he said, lean your head back, close your eyes, jump up and down, count to 10 backwards. And I was thinking, what an idiot. I really need to be drinking if I could do this. But then he did all his little sobriety tests and had us walk that little line out there. I had me do it. And he told me, he said, well, you appear to be where you can drive. Can you follow us back to the sheriff's department? I said, I can, but I don't know if I want to or not. He said, you need to follow us back to the sheriff's department. And I said, okay. So we got in the car and we followed them back to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. And they took us inside and they took Charlie in a room. They took me into a separate room and they interrogated us both. I don't know what to say to Charlie because I wasn't in the room with him, but they quizzed me and they told me, look, if this is a hoax you guys are playing, you're going to spend a lot of time in jail, so you better come forward now and tell us if it is. I said, there ain't nothing happened to me. Might have Charlie, but it ain't been nothing happened to me. So where we messed up, or where I messed up, and they really got together on it, they put us back in a room together, and they hit a tape recorder just to see what Charlie and I was going to say. So we released, Charlie and I sat in there and talked. They wasn't in there, but they had that recorder. And we kind of spilled our feelings out to each other. No idea there was a tape recorder in there. And he came back in, and I guess he got the tape out. He didn't let us see him do it, but he got the tape, and they went in there. Him and the sheriff, Fred Diamond, listened to it at the time. And I could tell the difference in them guys. Their face was just a lot more serious and a lot more different than what it was when he took us in that room. They was expecting us to start laughing and talking about how we was trying to fool them. But you know, you hear a grown man cry and start wearing and all, you don't come back in there and laugh at him. It's not a good idea. But I think that is one of the things that convinced them that this happened to us, or they, like us, at the time, they really didn't know what had happened, but they knew something had happened. And that's pretty much what Dr. Heineck said. So anyhow, the sheriff came in, told us to go on back home and get some rest, and he'd see us tomorrow. Well, I really wasn't expecting to see him or hoping I wouldn't. We drove back home and didn't say a whole lot to each other. And when we got there, I remember I went to my room and there was a bathroom in it. I pulled all my clothes off, my shoes, everything I had off. I put them in a paper bag because they didn't have plastic bags in. And I got in the tub and there was a gallon of bleach on the tub. And I poured that bleach down the top of my head all over, and I was scrubbing it in because I was worried about a bacterial infection of some kind. I knew this couldn't be healthy, what we went through. I was also worried about a little radiation. And I brought this up to Charlie, and he told me not to worry about it. He'd take care of it. So the next day we got up. I threw that bag in the dumpster outside the Collegeville apartments. The next day we got up and we went on back to work. And this is where I started having my fallouts with Charlie here. We got there, and I really didn't know how many cars was there because the day before was my first day there, and this is going to be my last day. But I knew it was a lot of cars around there, and a lot of press, a lot of news media cars, and a lot of newspaper press and all that. And I thought, I wonder what all this is about. I still had no idea it was about us. Well, when we brassed in and got to a workstation, called mine and Charlie's name to come to the big office. Well, I knew what it was about then. I knew somebody had leaked a story. It made me sick. I got on my hands and knees out in the parking lot, and I started throwing up. And finally, I got up and got in, and that's when the media wanted a press release and all. So the shipyard called their personal attorney, Joe Camingo, to come down, and they told us to give him a press release. They could not conduct business in their office with all this going on because of the phones now. So Charlie pretty much told Joe what happened. I just kind of sputtered and uttered around with him. He went out and he gave a big press release. And by that time, the sheriff department had got there. And that's when they took us to, agreed to take us up for an examination to the Singing River Hospital. They did blood work. They looked at the marks on my arms. They did listen to us. And finally, they decided we was well enough we could leave. Well, when we got back to the car, the deputy that was driving us, we went in a patrol car, said that they wanted to see us at Keesler. So apparently Keesler started taking us pretty serious, but they wanted to check us for radiation. So he rushed us that 30 miles to Biloxi Air Force Base. They escorted us on in. They checked us for radiation. And then they said, when they got through, they said it's all clear. They had a 6 or 7 man out there in hazmat suits. So they wanted to see us in the back. Well, they escorted us down a long hallway. And I say a long one because it must have seemed like it took 5 hours to get there. I know it wasn't just a few minutes. But I was starting to get a little concerned then. And when we got back there, they had the local government, which would be the mayors from all 3 towns down here, police chiefs, a few deputies, and Keesler Air Force officials. Well, they didn't, I can't say they interrogated us, but I guess in their own way it was. They asked us questions, and then they was really nice. They didn't say they believed us or didn't believe us. They said, okay, we're done. You can take him back to where you got him. So they drove us back to the deputy sheriff that had us took us back to the shipyard that we was working at for my one day before I got fired. And they told us, don't leave, don't do nothing. There's somebody here that wants to talk to you. And that was Dr. James Allen Hynek and Dr. Harder from the University of California that had came in on their own dime just to talk to us. And Dr. Hynek was going out that evening to the site to look it over and check everything. And he wanted to see us the next morning. Now, I was actually planning on going back to Laurel that night, but I did put it off out of respect for Dr. Hynek, although I didn't know who he was at the time. I thought he was just some old man that was nosy. But he came in, and we went back to work the next day, and Dr. Hynek was sitting there, and Dr. Harder took Charlie to the back and examined him, and I think he hypnotized Charlie. I don't know for sure. I talked to Dr. Hynek, told him about what happened. At this time and point, I didn't see no need in lying to somebody that looked important. And, you know, he did kind of look important looking over them little glasses and his little goatee and all there. So I talked to Dr. Hynek, and he got thorough. He said he'd been to the site and all. And when he got through, he sent me back to Dr. Harder that tried to hypnotize me, but I don't think I could be hypnotized at this time. So after we got through, Hynek made a release to the press that he really didn't know what had happened, but he sincerely knew something had happened. And that pretty much wound it up. When I left there, I went home. I jumped in my car and I went right straight back to Laurel. And I had some emotional problems then when I got back to Laurel. You know, I went to check in the hospital. I had some panic attacks or something, and they wouldn't see me what I thought was fast enough. So my brother had taken me up there, and I kind of messed the emergency room up. I made an ass out of myself, to be honest with you. But anyhow, that pretty much catches everything up besides the media chasing me down. And I mean, that was terrible. Every time I'd get a new job, they would show up. And I wouldn't have minded giving a press release, but what I minded was giving them a press release and reading about it in the paper the next morning. It wasn't nothing what I said. Completely out of their imagination. They changed it. They made me look like a fool, or they thought they was. They just making themselves look like one. And for example, we had companies show up out of Seattle, Washington one day. We was sitting on the, we have a screened-in back porch. And this guy from the Associated Press, matter of fact, he hadn't been long. He's one of the major ones that broke the big story. He drove up and just started taking pictures and filming.
Wow.
So trying to be nice in front of my company instead of saying, get off my property, I don't want you here and all. I said, well, come in, because they knew something was happening then. I didn't really give the guy an interview, but I let him take his old pictures and, you know, dream up what he wanted to dream, and everybody else talked to him but me. And then he left, and I said, now, how did you find me? He said, well, the Moss Point, the school board from Moss Point, they knowed you, and they come bringing me over here. Well, anyhow, just a little stuff like that. It's been rather bad, but it's a lot better since Philip and I have sat down and done the book and got it out. I mean, I don't mind talking about it now because the story's black and white. It's there.
Yeah,
and anybody want it, they can get the book and read it in there. Now, we have evidence in the book that would stand up in a court of law, such as we got polygraph tests, voice stress tests, we've been hypnotized, but most of all now, and this stands up in a court of law anywhere, which the rest of that stuff won't, we have eyewitness accounts. And it's not just one, it's been several of them. And since the book signing, it's been people coming forward, but they wouldn't want me telling their name and all. And I really do believe they've seen it. Now, some of them I think are pulling my leg. I got one or two that I talked to that, you know, I just didn't feel was real sincere. But I'm not going to call them a liar because I know how that feels. But I am going to try to talk to them a little more. I hadn't even had time to talk to Philip about this. They said they was there and or in the vicinity and seen things. Of course, we met a lot of sincere people that was in the vicinity and seen things, or eyewitnesses.
Have you ever sort of like, while you sort of like had access to the internet, have you ever gone back to YouTube and actually listened to the tape that was made of you and Charlie by the sheriff's department?
The what they call the secret tape?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And I tell you, when I did that the other day at the book signing, of course, Philip put a copy of that in the book for me to read and all. But, you know, there's a lot of that stuff in that book I never read. I knew what I had written, and I let my mother read it. And that was the first time she had ever heard the story. And she actually cried. And they was experiences that she had living in Ellisville, Mississippi, where it scared her and her brother. She thought they was coming after me. And her and my brother went to the back door when all the cows run back. And she said all the cows running to the back of the field. And she could remember telling him, Calvin's not here, Calvin's not here. I told her the other day, thank you for trying to send them to me, telling them I wasn't there.
Excellent. So what other parts have you dug out as well, Phil? Because I know that there's been sort of like other evidence and that's come about, hasn't there, since you've done the original?
Yeah, what Calvin and I are now in the process of just beginning is going to do a revised edition of the book. And that's Calvin telling his story there. He mentions about the creature he calls Big Ugly. Believes he felt some kind of injection. Well, after the book was published, you know, I was still on the hunt for documents, etc. And I went round all the UFO groups, and one of those I went to was the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, for obvious reasons, because Hynek had been on site. They sent me what they had on it, which was largely newspaper cuttings and what have you. But in there is a one-page document. It's typewritten because you can see where they've typed over the date and they've gone back and they've made a mess of it. So it's written just, I think, 5 days after what had happened to Calvin and Charlie. And it details a physical examination of both gentlemen and what it remarks upon. And it says it found puncture wounds on both Calvin and Charlie. So not only do we have Calvin's and Charlie's story, but here we have a document that you know, offers proof that there were, you know, so that's, you know, the only thing that's missing is who wrote the document. But we believe it was Dr. James Harder, because he's the only one that examined Calvin and Charlie in the first place. So that was fascinating. And one of the things that Calvin mentioned there was the other eyewitnesses. Now, we knew there were some because they are mentioned in Charlie's book, or at least one is. Now, one of the things Calvin did, he did an interview for the local TV news. And it was a 5 or 8 minute long piece, and it was very well done, very respectful. Yep. So somebody watched that and then transferred it onto YouTube. And a young lady left a comment. And it basically said, my mum and dad witnessed this. They were on the opposite side of the river at the same time on the same night. And it gave a few brief details. And I happened to see this. And I thought, what? So I managed to find the lady on social media, and only a youngish woman, and she gave me her parents' telephone number, and that was Mr. and Mrs. Blair, who lived down in Alabama. And myself and my colleague in the States, Dr. Irina Scott, spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Blair, and the lady who left the remark on YouTube was their daughter, their youngest daughter. What the Blairs told us, they were indeed on the opposite side of the river that same night, approximately the same time. Mr. Blair worked in the fishing industry, and he was waiting for a boat to come in, and it was late. So he was having a sleep in the back of the car, and Mrs. Blair got out, and she could see this big blue light the other side of the river. She said it seemed to be zigzagging around as if it was either looking for something or it was lost and it didn't know where it was going. So finally, their boat started to come in. So Mr. Blair, who also saw the lights, they walked along this pier, and it's dark by this time. And she says all of a sudden there was this big splash in the water next to her, literally. Now, Mr. Blair didn't see anything because he'd gone on ahead, but he heard this splash. And she looked down and she says, there is this strange grey man in the water.
Wow.
And he went under the water and never came back up again. So she threw her husband's belongings, his coat or his jacket, his clothes, onto the boat, and he was off. And she had to walk back down this pier to get back to the car, and she run like mad, you know. And of course, the next day, she saw the story on the news like everyone else about Charlie and Calvin. She said, that was us. You know, we saw the same thing. And she often wondered if something similar hadn't happened to them. But, you know, they decided not to speak up for fear of ridicule and so on. So had her daughter not left that little comment on YouTube, we probably would never have found them. So that was amazing. And Calvin's met Mr. and Mrs. Blair since then. They were at the historical marker presentation. Then when Calvin did one of his book signings, there was a gentleman came up to him, and of course they're busy signing books, and they said, "Yeah, you know, I saw it that night. I was there." Calvin said, "Hang on a minute." Of course, this gentleman then was gone. Calvin and his wife couldn't remember his name, but luckily, someone had taken a photograph, so we had a picture of him. So I put this onto social media, I think 3 times, and in the end, someone said, "I know who that is. It's Mr. Lee." So we got a phone number for him. They got permission first to give it. We spoke to Mr. Lee and his wife, and again, he was on the opposite side of the river, but he was working in the shipyard as a crane driver. But he was moonlighting. He had a regular day job, and he was doing a little bit of extra for someone else. And he said, "Philip," he said, "the cab of my crane was about 8 or 10 feet off the ground." And he said, "You could see right across the river." And I won't forget what he said. He said, "It's the darndest thing you ever did see." And he reports seeing this big blue thing in the sky. And he watched it for about 10 minutes. The only reason he took his eyes off it is because he had something on the end of his crane, and he had co-workers below, and he was frightened of dropping it on them. So he concentrated on what he was doing, looked back, and this thing had gone. And that's Mr. Lee. And again, I've spoken to Mr. Lee. My colleague, Dr. Imona Scott, has interviewed him. And then there are others. You know, we had another lady, again, who was at the book signing called Mrs. Branning. She was out on a double date that night, you know, and they were cruising in the car when they saw it. There was another lady whose name escapes me at the moment, but she had a dog, and she used to take the dog for a walk approximately the same time every night. She said, as soon as I stepped out my front door with the dog, that thing was there right in front of me. Same night, same time as Calvin. So, you know, collectively, there's 5 individuals. They don't know each other. They've never met each other. They certainly didn't know Calvin, but now we have them all on the record. And we believe, like Calvin has been saying, there are even more. And that kind of testimony would technically stand up in court, you know?
Yeah, of course.
And it's absolutely fascinating, especially the Blairs, when she talks about this thing splashing into the water and this strange grey creature, man, person. She didn't know what to call it, you know, and it went under the water and never came back up. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Well, exactly, because I mean, you if any of you guys, I don't know if you're able to get a picture of what they would describe to have looked like, but I mean, like the way they look, I mean, is not what we're kind of used to. We're sort of like, you know, I've seen your friends. I mean, elephant feet and kind of lobster claws aren't exactly the. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Sarah's just bringing up a picture.
Bizarre. But what is also interesting, I've communicated with the telephone police dispatcher that night. The gentleman that Charlie phoned, and he says, "You know, Philip, I must have taken 50 phone calls that night." 50.
Wow.
Yeah. And he says, not only that, when I got back to the police station, there was people there in person reporting it. You know?
No, it's on the screen now.
Yeah. So there you go. Strange grey creatures. So even the police dispatcher is talking about 50 people or more calling in that night, and others being in the police station as well in person to report it. And now what's interesting, I published another little book about Pascagoula by a gentleman called Stefanos Panagiotakis, and he's from Greece.
Try saying that after a few drinks.
Yeah.